Lars. The Acmon blue is one of the really puzzling blues in Washington because it's so easy to confuse the species with the lupin blue. The lupin blue is very widespread in Washington, and the Acmon is relatively scarce, although we're getting a pretty good feeling for where this butterfly flies. It might be more common than we think. The life history of the two species are very similar. The egg is typical lycaenid egg. The first instar, like all of the lycaenids, they have proportionally very long setae, these hair-like projections that stick out from the back of the little larva, and they have this purplish black head. This is a tiny little larva. It's only 1 millimeter long, which, if you can imagine, the length of the larva is really tiny. Here's the second instar. You see how it has this shaggy look? That's very typical of the lupin blue and of course the Acmon blue as well. As it remains shaggy in the third instar. Acmon blue actually feeds on flowers to a much greater extent than the lupin blue does. And because of that, by the time we get into the third instar, we often see the larvae turning pink. This particular one isn't, but you find third instars that are quite pink. And here's the fourth instar, the final instar, at 9 millimeters long, and you see it becomes quite pink. It's feeding on the flowers of Acmon nudum, the bare-stemmed desert buckwheat, which is a plant that has a very limited range in Washington. Side view of the same larva. And the pupa, very typical lycaenid pupa. It's large on the abdomen end and smaller on the head end. There's the wing case. You can see a little bit of the what's going to be the proboscis. And here again is the adult. This is just a ventral view of the adult. But telling the lupin blue apart from the Acmon blue is mainly what I wanted to talk tonight. Here's an Acmon blue. You notice a couple things here. This is a dead specimen. I'm not trying to pretend it's alive. The blue is a kind of a light silvery blue, whereas the lupin blue will be a darker blue, more of a deep blue. These orange spots are called lunules, and on lupin blues there's usually a dark line of scales that separate the lunules from the blue wings. And in Acmon, which this is, that line is usually missing. And the main difference is size. Here's an indication of how much difference there is in size. We have one population of lupin blues over here, another on the left, and in the middle, these are Acmon blues. See how much smaller they are. These are actually lowland blues. Most of within both of these species, most of them feed on buckwheats in the genus Acmon. But Acmon blues are known to feed also on legumes in the spring. These are double-rooted, and as far as we know, most of the lupin blues are single-rooted. We're still working on confirming that. The first brood of Acmons fly early in the spring, pretty much before the lupins start flying, and then again later in August and early September, the Acmons will fly again. But we have a puzzling population that's higher elevation. Oh, I'm sorry. This is just a blow up of the same thing. These are the small Acmon blues. Just looking closer. Because you notice with the lupin blues, you see this dark line of scales I was talking about, separating the blue from the orange lunules. And generally in the Acmon blue, you don't see that dark line. Just lunules right against blue. Sometimes you do, though. You see there's a trace of it on this one. But all of these characteristics are kind of variable. One of the, I mentioned how many broods they have. That's one of the differences between lupin and Acmon. The lupin blues are pretty much single-brooded, although we have some hints that maybe in some places, sometimes they go double-brooded. But the Acmons are well established as being double-brooded. The lupin blues feed on leaves of buckwheats. Yes?
Oh, maybe you were just going to say it. I noticed that you have periodic medium there, and you said they feed on lupin before. So is that?
Yeah. The high elevation population feeds on nudum, but these little things that occur out in the shrub steppe, they feed on other buckwheats, like medium is one of the plants that they use.
So that's the larval plant, not the...
That's the larval plant. We're not talking about nectar.
They offer nectar on them also.
Sure. They'll nectar on anything they can get nectar from, but these are the larval host plants. Okay, I was going to say that the lupin blues, for most of their life history, they feed on the leaves of the host plants, the buckwheats, whereas the acmons feed on flowers primarily. That's why often the larvae of acmon are pink. They take on the coloration of the blossoms, while the larvae of lupini are green. They stay green like the leaves. But here's another population that's a puzzle one. This is a high elevation population. The ones in the middle are acmon that feed on Eriogonum nudum. You notice they're about the same size as lupini. These are bigger butterflies. The other characters are closer to lupini. They're not quite as light on the blue. They do usually not have the dark scales between the lunules. Let's go closer and look at this again. They usually lack the dark line between the lunules and the blue, whereas lupin blue have those dark lines. But this is a population that grows at higher elevation. They feed only on Eriogonum nudum, which is in our state is found pretty much at higher elevation. And these, unlike their smaller cousins down in the shrub steppe, these are apparently single-brooded as lupin are. So these are much closer. So how on earth do you tell these apart? Well, there's a fellow named Kutsis. This says Kutsis. I think it should be Kutsis, shouldn't it, John?
Yeah.
C-O-U-T-S-I-S.
It's supposed to be, yes.
Yeah. He's a fellow who's just recently done a paper. This is a 2011 paper. He worked on California acmon and lupini. And he studied the genitalia. Now, when you look at these genitalia, what we're looking at is the tip of the tail of the blue butterfly. This would be the end of the body with the head pointing off that direction. So this is very tiny. You can see from the scale here, the whole structure is only a little over 1.5 millimeters long. And what he found is, this is lupini over here, this is acmon over here. What he found is this projection up here, the top projection, in lupini has a big hump on top of it, whereas in acmon it's a very subtle little hump, and the whole structure is smaller and more slender. And he looked at a number of populations in California. There's 6 different populations he studied in California of lupini, and here's 3 of acmon. You see they're pretty, the characters are pretty predictable in all of them that he found. Now, previously, we always looked at the genitalia. This is a side view. All of these are side view with the insect facing to the left. And previously, we always looked down at the same structure from above. And that's what we're seeing here. And in these structures, the head would be down, pointing down. And so this structure that looks like a solid block is actually formed if you look at it from above. And we, based on Scott's old work, butterflies of North America, we've been trying for a long time to use these characters to separate acmon and lupini. It just doesn't work. It's just too hard to separate it by those characters. And so these new Kutsis papers are, hopefully they're going to pan out to be useful and reliable. So far it looks like they're tracking pretty good. I've just looked at 4 different populations, and so far it looks like they're telling us what's acmon and what's lupini. So it's really going to help us if this turns out to be as reliable as it appears to be. It's going to really help us find out just what the ranges of these 2 butterflies are and how they intersect here in Washington. So that's about all I have on this. Any questions? Yeah, well.
Dave, on this trip of ours, we encountered the small autumn acmon types on the Eriogonum niveum all the way from well up in Stevens County all the way down to the gorge, and many sites in between. Everywhere we look on the niveum, these blues are present. And
where was this again?
well, this is all the way from the Spokane and Colville reservations in the north, all the way down to Underwood on the gorge,
It's all along
and
the
Sprague Lake in between, yeah, lots of sites along the east side, and there are lots of others, but it's a very widespread butterfly on Nevium in the fall. But you say it's too brooded, and it makes sense it would be. What's it doing in the spring? The Nevium only blooms and is lush in the fall. What would a spring brood be doing? What would it be have fed on? Do you think it might be on legumes in the spring brood, or what?
Well, Andy Warren in his Butterflies of Oregon found that they feed on legumes in the spring brood, vetches and such things, and maybe, well, we don't know what all. And then the second brood feeds on buckwheat.
Now, there's no reason to assume that those butterflies you find in the fall actually represent a surviving population. They may be colonizers from somewhere else. That's why we need to go back to these places like in May and June to see if there's broods preceding this fall. If you end up only having them in August and September, then they're moving into these areas.
Or the third hypothesis is that it is a resident population with only a single brood that only appears in the fall.
Yeah, I guess you have to assume that's possible too.
We have a couple places where David James has found both spring and fall populations that are small, so we need to get some samples and really check them out to see that they are indeed Acmon. I have a few from one location that certainly appear to be Acmon. One is Waterworks Canyon, which is supposed to be Acmon, and the other is this new the Conservancy site in Cowichy, the Cowichy Conservancy.
Snow Mountain Ranch.
Snow Mountain Ranch. So he's got them, he's documented 2 broods in both of these places. I haven't sampled them yet, but only partially in one of these. So we're going to try to get samples, check out the genitalia, and check out the adult sizes and all these things, and just try to start putting the pieces together. The stuff that you found, Bob, that's far and away the furthest north that we've had Acmon in the state, far and away.
Really abundant up on the Spokane Reservation, halfway up Stevens County.
That's real interesting, yeah. Very deep.
Everywhere there was a patch of Nevium that the blues are present.
Yeah. So we haven't found out everything there is to find out about these blues in the question. Just
Are there other Washington butterflies that have like a mountain population which is larger than the lowland one? I mean, is that uncommon?
we have lots of species that have low elevation and higher elevation populations, but I don't know that they necessarily get larger at higher elevations. I can't think of anything offhand. Can anybody else?
Did you say that was the case with Acmon blue? That those large ones were from the mountains?
Andy Warren considered this to be an Acmon blue, and ours is very similar. Same habitat, same elevation, same host plant, everything is similar. I'm not completely convinced they're the same thing as the low elevation ones. Yeah, John?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that they're not probably related to the things at lower elevations so much as they're part of a phenomenon historically with populations that are in Oregon, so that in terms of relationships, they're not derived from lower elevations. All this stuff that Bob just reporting, in the Columbia Basin and peripheral areas, this is kind of a recent phenomenon. This has happened in my lifetime. So, we're actually seeing things happening on a really an exploratory scale for these creatures in the span of one single lifetime of a human being. So, I think the big ones you were talking about that are noodle feeders up in the mountains, they're actually an old thing related to something that happened just after the glaciers melted. So, they're not really collectively related to each other at all.
These blues are confusing, they're difficult, there's a lot of interesting stuff yet to be discovered with these blues, and we feel that there's a number of new species, or at least a few new species that have never been discovered or have never been named. Merrill brought some specimens of another blue, Plebeius, unnamed species from Mount St. Helens, and we're just comparing it tonight with an unnamed blue from west central Oregon. And they seem to be the same thing, so once that's given a name.
It's another case in point, same thing, two different blues from two different states, old distributions, we're just starting to learn about these things.
So
we need to go out and look for more.
Right. Yeah, you'd think that the blues are well sampled. They're really, well, they've been sampled a lot, but we need a lot of real careful sampling associate them with the host plants and try to check out the life histories. So it's pretty fun stuff. So anyway, the Oregon species is being very, very, very slowly described by Paul Opler. What has he been doing 20 years now? When he finally gives it a name, we'll have a new species here in Washington.
Yeah.